The stagecoach thundered across a dusty road, carrying a secret no one in the sleepy town of Redwood could have seen coming. In that rickety wooden carriage, Clara Hastings clutched two squirming bundles, her twin toddlers, while the wheels of fate ground forward. She had come all this way to marry a stranger who had promised her security and a fresh start. Yet destiny had other plans. The scorching sun bore down, and whispers of outlaws like Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday echoed across the frontier. Little did anyone know that Clara's arrival would unleash a torrent of scandal, heartbreak, and redemption in Redwood. In the year 1879, Redwood was little more than a dusty outpost straddling the boundary between law and lawlessness. Over the past few years, news of gold mines and cattle booms had swelled the population as people across the country ventured west in search of riches or a fresh start. Tall, pinewood cabins dotted the rolling foothills, while the main street was lined with establishments that spoke of hard work, faith and, at times, fleeting pleasures: a modest general store, a saloon called the Broken Barrel, a tiny schoolhouse and a single doctor's clinic that struggled to keep pace with the perils of frontier living. Rumor had it Wyatt Earp and his brothers had once passed through Redwood on their way to Tombstone, seeking to carve order out of chaos. Though the Earps never stayed long, their name had clung to Redwood's identity, leaving folks both proud and wary of the law's tenuous grip. It was into this stark, sun-scorched town that Clara Hastings arrived. The townspeople were used to mail-order brides, stepping off dusty stagecoaches, each one with its own story of heartbreak, hope, or desperation. But this time, the hush that fell over Redwood's main street was not merely the curiosity of onlookers. It was the sight of two small children, wide-eyed twins, peeking out from beneath the brim of Clara's hat, that truly set tongues wagging. By day's end, Redwood was abuzz with talk of the newcomer, her mysterious past, and the fiancé who awaited her arrival. Clara Hastings had been raised in a small farming community in Ohio, where the soil was rich but life was unrelentingly harsh. Her father had fallen ill when she was just a child, leaving her mother to manage the farm alone. Determined to forge a better path, Clara spent her youth studying whatever texts she could find. She devoured books on midwifery, medical remedies, and housekeeping, hoping to develop skills that could secure her place in a changing world. When she married a traveling merchant at 19, she was eager for adventure and the promise of a comfortable future. But that marriage ended in tragedy. He passed away in a freak accident the winter her twins were born, leaving Clara alone, widowed, and grappling with questions she did not know how to answer. Deeply in debt, she found an advertisement for a mail-order bride pinned to a church bulletin. It promised stability and a quiet life in a growing western town. With 2 infants to care for and no extended family willing to shoulder her burden, Clara prayed the advertisement's author was a decent man who would accept her children. Throughout her journey from Ohio, Clara repeated the name of her groom-to-be in her thoughts: Phineas McCall. His letters had been formal but not cold, describing a humble home, a small ranch on the outskirts of Redwood, and a gentle nature. The promise of safety comforted her during long nights on the trail. Though she felt fear creeping in at every mile, Clara resolved to reach Redwood for the sake of her children's futures, whatever that might look like when she finally arrived. The stagecoach rattled and groaned as it pulled into Redwood on a sweltering afternoon. Dust clouds billowed in its wake, and the driver, wearing a sweat-stained hat, hollered to the local stable boy to tend the horses. Clara braced herself for the stares she knew would come. She lifted her twins, Sarah and Simon, off the worn leather seat and prepared to step down. Townswomen paused on wooden sidewalks, their eyes flicking from Clara's slender frame to the two children clinging to her skirts. Some faces held concern, others curiosity, and a few barely masked disapproval. Word travelled fast in Redwood, and by the time Clara's heeled boots struck the dirt, several curious onlookers had gathered. "Miss Hastings." A man's voice, a bit higher than she expected, called out. She turned her heart, hammering. There stood a lanky figure with a neatly trimmed moustache. His clothes were clean but worn, and he shifted his weight from foot to foot as though he were caught between excitement and unease. "Yes," Clara managed, smoothing a trembling hand over Sarah's hair. "And you must be Phineas McCall," he said, tipping his hat. His eyes roamed over Clara, then the twins, lingering a beat too long on the children. "I wasn't expecting." A shadow crossed his features as his gaze darted around at the gathering crowd. Several spectators leaned in, eager to catch any snippet of conversation that might fuel the next day's gossip. Already, Clara felt her hopes start to splinter at the edges. Standing before the man she had come so far to marry, Clara forced herself to remain poised. She extended her hand, her voice unwavering as she introduced the children by name. Phineas hesitated for what felt like an eternity. The silence felt heavier than the scorching sun overhead. The only sound was the rustle of onlookers who craned their necks to catch each nuance of this awkward exchange. Phineas finally took Clara's hand in a polite, half-hearted shake. He cleared his throat. "Miss Hastings, I wasn't told you had children." Clara stiffened. Though her heart sank, she lifted her chin. "I assumed my letter reached you. I wrote that I was widowed with 2 young ones." His mouth formed a tight line, and he cast a glance around, clearly aware of the eyes upon him. "I must not have received it," he said, but the unease in his face told another story. "Would you like to sit down? Maybe get out of the sun?" With no choice but to follow, Clara nodded. The small cluster of townsfolk parted, letting Phineas lead her toward the Broken Barrel saloon, which doubled as a dusty cafe in the daytime. A few whispered exchanges crackled in the air behind them. Already the question of how Phineas would respond to the unexpected children rippled through Redwood. Clara felt the weight of judgment pressing in on her from every angle. The sense of hope she had harbored for so long began to wither. Inside the Broken Barrel saloon, the dim light offered relief from the relentless heat outside. Square wooden tables bore the scars of countless patron brawls and spilled drinks. A bartender named Rufus, barrel-chested with a craggy face, peered at Clara and the children curiously. A pair of old-timers in the corner paused mid-conversation, their whispers momentarily hushed by the new arrivals. Phineas led the way to a corner table, practically hiding from the other patrons. His mind seemed to race as he offered Clara a seat. The twins, wide-eyed and fussy from the heat, clung to her, forcing Phineas to shuffle aside a chair to accommodate them. He tried a thin smile, which did little to mask his apprehension. "Look," he began, keeping his voice low. "I don't mean to be unkind, Miss Hastings, but this is quite the surprise." His gaze flicked between the twins who were now quietly playing with the folds of Clara's skirt. Clara swallowed hard. "I understand, Mr. McCall, but I wrote to you explaining my situation. I have the letter here." She reached into her small travel bag, rummaging past a worn children's toy and a battered copy of the good book. "No need." Phineas snapped his tone, betraying his frustration. He forced a polite, if strained, composure. "Perhaps we can talk more privately. My ranch is just a mile up the road. We should go there and discuss our arrangement." Though Clara managed a nod, a cold wave of dread washed over her. Something told her this conversation would not go in her favor. Barely an hour passed before Phineas had borrowed a small buckboard wagon from a neighbor and loaded Clara's trunk in the back. The sight of the children now napping in Clara's arms after their long journey seemed to unnerve him further. He climbed up to the driver's bench stiffly, as though each step required conscious effort. Clara settled in beside him. The children nestled close while the wagon jolted forward along a rutted dirt path. The ride to Phineas's ranch was quiet and tense. Gnarled mesquite trees lined the route, and the heat shimmered in the distance. Occasionally a hawk's cry would punctuate the silence, or the roll of wagon wheels would jolt the twins awake. Phineas offered no conversation. Instead, he seemed to examine the horizon, as though searching for escape. Clara glanced over, recalling how warm and open his letters had seemed. In them, he had described building a new life on the frontier, yearning for a companion who would help share the burdens and joys of homesteading. Those words were nothing like the uneasy man who sat beside her, now the man who appeared consumed with anxiety at the sight of her children. When the ranch finally came into view, Clara exhaled with relief. Despite her inner turmoil, she found the modest spread appealing: a tidy single-story cabin, a barn, and a small herd of cattle grazing under the baking sun. Yet the question remained, would she and her children ever be truly welcome? By the furrow in Phineas's brow, she feared the worst. Phineas helped Clara down from the wagon, but his earlier tension showed no sign of easing. While Clara carried the twins inside, he paused to wrestle her trunk onto the porch. The cabin interior was sparse but clean, a single main room, with a hearth, a table, and a wooden rocking chair in the corner. A narrow hallway led to a small bedroom on one side and a pantry on the other. Clara took in the surroundings, imagining where she and the twins might fit. She gently laid Sarah and Simon on a simple quilt she found folded on the floor. Their small chests rose and fell in the heavy hush of the afternoon. Phineas lingered near the threshold, as though deciding whether to step further inside or simply walk away. McCall. Clara began, trying not to let her voice tremble. I understand this is a shock, but please know I only came because... He raised a hand, halting her. The letter you mentioned, I never saw it. Perhaps it got lost in the mail or stolen along the way. His attempt at diplomacy didn't mask the frustration in his voice. I'm not prepared to raise 2 children, Miss Hastings. This was not the arrangement we discussed initially. Clara braced herself. I can do most of the child-rearing on my own, she insisted. I'm skilled in housekeeping and some nursing. I only hope for a chance. But Phineas turned away, jaw clenched. I need time to think, he muttered. Then he stepped out onto the porch and closed the door gently behind him, leaving Clara feeling as though she was intruding on a life she no longer believed she could share. News travels fast in small towns, and Redwood was no exception. By sundown, nearly everyone knew about the new mail-order bride who arrived with twins, the shell-shocked groom, and the hush that hung between them. Many folks were eager for tidbits, but one man's interest was driven by compassion, not curiosity. Dr. James Monroe Redwood's widowed physician learned of Clara's predicament from a patient who had witnessed the scene at the saloon. Tall and broad-shouldered with gentle, intelligent eyes, Dr. Monroe had arrived in Redwood a few years prior, intent on bringing proper medical care to the frontier. Some whispered he was running from the grief of losing his wife to illness in St. Louis. Others believed he was simply searching for a place to make a fresh start. Whatever the reason, Redwood had come to rely on his expertise from childbirth to bullet wounds. That evening, after treating a ranch hand's sprained ankle, Dr. Monroe slipped into the Broken Barrel for a quick meal. Instead of the usual rowdiness, he found the saloon abuzz about the new arrival. Dr. Monroe, overhearing the talk, frowned at the jokes and barbed gossip swirling around Clara's circumstances. He had seen enough tragedy to know how vulnerable a woman, especially a mother with young children, could be in a place like Redwood if her future was uncertain. A seed of concern took root in his mind. Without a second thought, he made plans to check on Phineas and Clara the next day. Perhaps he mused there was some way he could help. Nightfall brought cool relief to the ranch, but it did little to calm the uneasy tension between Clara and Phineas. The twins, still on edge from days of travel and the sudden change in environment, cried fitfully in the dim lantern light. Clara worked tirelessly to soothe them, singing soft lullabies she learned in her Ohio church. Yet each wail and whimper seemed to strike a nerve in Phineas, whose expression darkened with every passing moment. They sat at the small kitchen table, silent, except for the children's whimpers. Clara had cooked a simple stew with whatever she found in the sparse pantry, but Phineas ate mechanically, his gaze fixed on something beyond her, beyond this entire situation. Finally, after an excruciating stretch of silence, he spoke. "Miss Hastings, I'm sorry. I'm just not sure I can do this." She swallowed a lump in her throat. "We can make it work," she said, her voice trembling. "I know the letters we exchanged gave a different impression. But the truth is, it's not just the children he cut in. It's finances, the ranch. I owe money to the bank. I was counting on a different kind of partnership, one where I didn't have to feed extra mouths." His bluntness stung, but Clara forced herself to remain calm. "Phineas, I know how to run a household. I can manage the books, maybe even help with ranch work if needed. The children won't be a burden." But he only shook his head. Weariness etched into his features. "I need time," he repeated. "I can't promise anything right now." And with that, he stood and retreated to his bedroom, leaving Clara alone at the table, tears welling in her eyes as the twins finally drifted to sleep. The next day dawned in a haze of subdued hope for Clara. She rose early, determined to prove her worth on the ranch. While the twins slept, she ventured into the yard to gather water from the well and start breakfast. She was just about to head back inside when she heard hoofbeats approaching. A neighbor, Jacob Larson, slowed his horse near the cabin. "Mornin', miss," he said, tipping his hat. "Heard you were new here. I came to speak with Phineas about the cattle." His eyes flicked uncertainly to her children, now peering out from behind the door. Clara tried to smile. "He's inside," she said. "I'll fetch him." But Phineas appeared on the porch before she could move. "Jacob," he said, crossing his arms. "We'll talk in the barn." He barely spared Clara a glance as he motioned for his neighbor to follow. Clara swallowed her disappointment and went about her chores. She scrubbed the dishes, tried to coax the children to eat, and tidied the cabin. Though she worked diligently, the atmosphere remained thick with uncertainty. Every time Phineas glanced in her direction, she saw calculation in his eyes, as though he weighed the cost and benefit of keeping her around. She forced a bright face when she offered him coffee and biscuits later that morning. He accepted wordlessly, then resumed pacing around the kitchen, occasionally consulting a ledger with furrowed brows. Over and over, Clara prayed for a miracle, something to soften his heart and give them a chance. Mid-morning brought a knock at the door, accompanied by a warm voice calling out, "Phineas, it's Dr. Munro. Thought I'd stop by." Phineas paused in his pacing. "Come in," he said, sounding none too pleased about the interruption. The doctor stepped into the cabin, dressed in a plain vest and trousers, carrying a worn leather bag. His kind eyes immediately found Clara, and he offered a slight bow. "Good day, ma'am," he said. "I take it you must be Miss Hastings?" Clara nodded, relieved by the friendly tone. "Yes, doctor. I've only just arrived." "Welcome to Redwood." He glanced toward the two little heads peeking around Clara's skirts. "And these must be your twins." There was a gentle warmth in his voice as he addressed the children. Simon ducked behind Clara, but Sarah looked up her thumb in her mouth. The doctor offered a reassuring smile. Meanwhile, Phineas cleared his throat. "Did you come for a particular reason?" Dr. Munro nodded. "I heard in town that we had a new family in need of some help settling in. Wanted to see if everything's all right." He turned back to Clara, noticing the tired lines under her eyes. "Travel can be hard on little ones, and on mothers. If you need anything food medicine, please let me know." Clara's grateful smile was as genuine as she could manage under the circumstances. "Thank you, Doctor. That's very kind." Phineas took a step forward, eyeing the doctor with barely disguised impatience. Clara couldn't help feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe Dr. Munro's visit was the mercy she had prayed for. Seeing Phineas's unease, Dr. Munro kept his visit short. He spoke mainly to Clara, inquiring about the children's health. Had they been eating well, any fevers, coughs, or injuries? He recommended a few herbal remedies for the inevitable dust allergies that plagued newcomers. Throughout, Phineas hovered at the edge of the conversation, arms folded, a slight scowl forming. Before leaving, Dr. Munro quietly pulled Clara aside. He glanced at the meager food supply in the cabin. "Miss Hastings," he said softly, "I know you've come a long way. If ever you or your children need a safe place to rest or gather your thoughts, my clinic and adjoining home are always open, no charge." Tears pricked Clara's eyes. She was touched by his compassion, a rare commodity for a woman in her predicament. She pressed a hand over her heart in thanks. "Thank you, Doctor. You don't know how much that means to me." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, then turned to Phineas. "You know where to find me," he said, tipping his hat. "And if the children need a checkup, just bring them by." With that, Dr. Munro departed, leaving a sudden stillness in the cabin. Phineas looked both relieved and irked by the doctor's paternal concern for Clara. For her part, Clara held on to the small spark of warmth Dr. Munro had brought, a respite, however fleeting, from the coldness she felt from the man she was supposed to marry. The tension only escalated that afternoon. Phineas, apparently unsettled by the doctor's kindness, finally unloaded his frustrations in a rushed, angry tone. "This isn't what we agreed on, Clara," he said, voice rising. "I needed a wife who could work the ranch, manage the household, and—" He stopped himself, eyes flicking to the twins. "Look, I'm not heartless, but I can't handle two little mouths right now." Clara felt her cheeks burn. "I'm not asking for anything but the chance to prove myself. I can handle housework, budgeting, cooking, everything. I managed a farm for years back home." He paced, running his hands through his hair. "I'm behind on payments. My ranch isn't thriving. The bank's breathing down my neck, adding children to the mix." He let out a bitter laugh. "I don't have enough to feed them. Or you." Her spine stiffened. "You led me to believe this place was stable." He flinched. It was until the drought this summer. The cattle can't graze, and my well's nearly dry. Turning away, he let out a weary sigh. Let's be realistic. You'd be better off in town, maybe earning a wage doing laundry or helping the doctor. He swallowed. I'm not certain I can marry you anymore. The words stung, each one, like a punch to Clara's already fragile sense of security. She stood there, the enormity of her predicament crashing over her. Phineas, the man whose letters had offered salvation, was now pushing her away, and the West, vast and unforgiving, stretched out around her. Tearful and humiliated, Clara gathered a few belongings for the children. She refused to let Phineas see her cry, though her chest felt tight with fear and heartbreak. Stepping out of the house, she looked down the dusty road that led back to Redwood. It was a good mile into town, maybe more, but pride and desperation pushed her forward. Phineas didn't protest. In fact, he barely spoke as she tucked Sarah onto one hip and took Simon's hand. With only a small satchel slung over her shoulder, Clara trudged off the ranch. When she glanced back, Phineas was standing on the porch, arms crossed, wearing a conflicted expression. But he made no move to stop her. By the time she reached the edge of town, the twins were cranky and red-faced from the sun. Clara's throat was parched, and her legs felt heavy. Still, she had no place to go. Her gaze flickered across the row of storefronts, general store livery, the Broken Barrel Saloon, and landed on the modest whitewashed building with a wooden sign, Dr. Monroe's Clinic. She hesitated. Could she truly impose on the doctor's generosity? Yet she recalled his earnest offer and the kindness in his eyes. Summoning her courage, she trudged up the short set of steps to the front door. Her knock was light, but it felt like a thunderclap in the silence of that scorching afternoon. The door swung open to reveal Dr. Monroe. His concern deepened the moment he saw Clara's weary face and the disheveled children clinging to her skirts. Without hesitation, Dr. Monroe ushered Clara and the twins into his clinic. The main room was both an examination area and a waiting space lined with glass cabinets of medical instruments, bottles of laudanum, and various herbal tinctures. In the adjacent room, a small kitchen and cot revealed the doctor's private living quarters, humble but comfortable enough. He wasted no time fetching water for the twins, guiding them to sit on a low stool, while he knelt beside them, checking for signs of dehydration. Clara stood nearby, tears finally escaping, now that she was in the presence of kindness. "What happened?" he asked gently. She pressed her lips together, struggling to steady her voice. "Phineas, he doesn't want us." Dr. Monroe's expression hardened, though anger was carefully leashed. He nodded, as if he'd anticipated such news. "You and your children are safe here. Let's get you all settled. Then we can talk." He brought out a pitcher of fresh water, a few biscuits, and some cooled broth he had simmering on the stove. The twins, after initial shyness, dug in with the ravenous hunger of children who had walked miles in the sun. The doctor turned his attention to Clara, gently encouraging her to drink water and take a seat. As Clara sank onto a wooden chair, she felt a wave of relief tempered by uncertainty. How long could she impose on Dr. Monroe's hospitality? Would she forever be an outcast in Redwood? For now, she could do little more than give her children water, thank the doctor, and hold on to whatever sliver of hope remained. By nightfall, word spread that Clara was staying with Dr. Monroe. Speculation swirled like tumbleweeds through Redwood. Some insisted that the doctor was merely doing his Christian duty by offering shelter to a stranded widow. Others, with more malicious tongues, hinted at impropriety, fueling a fresh round of gossip at the Broken Barrel Saloon, whispers that Dr. Munro was sweet on Clara filled the corners of the dusty drinking hall. Sheriff Nathan Cole, a practical man with a grizzled beard, tried to quell the nastier rumors. "The doc's a decent fellow," he'd say, ignoring the more salacious speculation. If the lady needed help, he'd give it to her. That's all there is. But Redwood's thirst for gossip was not so easily sated. Meanwhile, Dr. Munro prepared a small cot in the adjoining living space so that Clara and the twins could sleep in privacy. He insisted on giving them his bed for the night while he took a makeshift cot in the clinic room. Clara protested, but he refused to budge. "I won't have you on the floor," he said, softly, ushering her into the simple bedroom. "You need rest. The children need rest. We'll figure out a longer-term solution in the morning." Though Clara was exhausted, her mind buzzed with fear and questions. What if Phineas insisted she return to him? What if Redwood shunned her for staying with Dr. Munro? As she settled the twins, she sent up a silent prayer for clarity, all while her heart hammered with mingled gratitude and dread. Long after the children had fallen asleep, Clara tiptoed out of the bedroom. Dr. Munro sat at a small writing desk in the clinic area, poring over medical notes by lamplight. The glow highlighted the concern etched into his features. She hesitated, not wanting to disturb him, but he glanced up and offered a gentle smile. "You should be resting," he said, setting aside a quill pen. Clara folded her hands. "I wanted to thank you again for everything. We'd be out on the street if not for you." The doctor shook his head. "Think nothing of it, Clara," he said quietly. The informal use of her first name felt natural, comforting even. "I've been in desperate situations before. I know how it feels to be stranded." Guilt mingled with curiosity in Clara's chest. "If you don't mind my asking, you lost your wife, didn't you?" His expression clouded. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling deeply. "Yes. In St. Louis. An outbreak of cholera. She was pregnant at the time. I couldn't save her despite my medical training." A tremor underlined his words. "I left after that. Couldn't bear the memories." Something in his voice resonated with Clara's own grief. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He offered a tight nod, clearing his throat. "We all lose people. But it doesn't mean you stop helping those who need you." Their eyes locked, sharing an unspoken understanding of loss. In that moment, an unexpected sense of closeness sparked between them. Two wounded souls brought together by circumstance in a harsh land. The following days fell into a cautious rhythm. Clara, determined not to be a burden, busied herself cleaning the clinic and preparing simple meals. She laundered sheets, tidied Dr. Munro's sparse living quarters, and even helped with minor tasks, such as organizing his collection of herbal remedies. The twins, initially shy, grew increasingly comfortable in the doctor's presence. Simon followed him around with wide-eyed curiosity, fascinated by the shining medical instruments, while Sarah clung to Clara, but would sometimes give the doctor a small, timid smile. Dr. Munro found himself quietly admiring Clara's resilience. Though her situation was precarious, she was essentially homeless and unwed in a town where suspicion thrived. She tackled each day's challenges with a tenacity he couldn't help but respect. In the evenings when the clinic was empty, they would speak in hushed tones about their pasts, their hopes and their fears. The line between guest and host blurred, evolving into something that resembled a partnership born out of necessity, but fortified by shared compassion. Redwood's gossip raged on, of course. A few brazen townspeople even took it upon themselves to drop by under the guise of checking in on the doc. But Doctor Monroe's calm, unwavering demeanor and Clara's unassuming courtesy soon dissuaded all but the most malicious tongues. Meanwhile, Clara was plagued by questions. What would become of her and the twins? Had she left one impossible situation only to land in another? And why did she feel her heart flutter whenever she caught the doctor glancing her way? One hot afternoon, a tense knock rattled the clinic door. Clara, attending to the twins, froze at the sound. "Doctor." Monroe opened the door to find Phineas McCall standing there, hat in hand, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. Doc Phineas greeted stiffly. Then his gaze flicked to Clara and the children in the back room. He inhaled. "I came to speak with Miss Hastings, if she's willing." Clara approached cautiously, her pulse pounding. She glanced at Dr. Monroe, who nodded and stepped aside, giving them space, yet remaining close enough to intervene if the conversation soured. Phineas removed his hat and twisted it in his hands. "I owe you an apology," he began. His voice strained. "I was caught off guard. I didn't mean to turn you out into the street." Clara's lips parted in a wary sigh. "Then why did you—" He let out a ragged breath. "I was frightened, all right. The drought's killing my ranch and the bank's about to foreclose if I can't make the next payment. I thought—" He shook his head. "I thought I could handle a wife who'd help me run the place. But children, that's a lot more to feed, more to worry about. But I never wanted to see you homeless." Clara glanced over at the twins busy with wooden toys Dr. Monroe had carved. Her face hardened. "You left me no choice." Phineas rubbed a hand over his face, shame crossing his features. "Maybe we can come to an arrangement. If you're still willing to marry me." Phineas's offer hung in the air, a thread of possibility tinged with uncertainty. Clara folded her arms protectively. "Why the change of heart?" He studied the floor. "I spoke with a neighbor who reminded me of the winter we lost half the cattle. If I'd had someone reliable in the house, maybe we could have done better. Also, rumors are swirling around town about you staying here with the doc. I didn't want people believing I'd abandoned my fiancée." The words stung, revealing he cared more about his reputation and convenience than he did about Clara or the twins. Yet the offer still represented a home, perhaps the only home she could claim in Redwood. Clara felt Dr. Monroe's quiet presence behind her, his gaze lending silent support. She flashed back to her first arrival, that hollow sense of dread when Phineas realized she had children. Could she endure that tension, day in and day out? "You're asking me to come back," she said, carefully. "But do you truly want us? My children and I deserve more than reluctant acceptance. We deserve a place we're truly welcome." Phineas bristled, but he nodded. "I'll try Clara. If we marry, I promise I won't turn you out again." Her heart wavered. Was this the security she had traveled so far to find, or just another trap? As the silence lengthened, Dr. Monroe watched her with concern, his mind teeming with thoughts and unspoken feelings. Clara stood at a fork in the road, uncertain which path offered salvation and which led to ruin. That night, Clara paced the length of Dr. Monroe's humble living area, her mind churning. The twins slept soundly in the small bedroom, leaving her alone with her troubled thoughts. A single lantern cast flickering shadows on the walls. Dr. Monroe emerged from the clinic, side exhaustion etched into his features from a day of treating a miner's broken leg. He offered a soft smile. "You look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders." She sank into a chair, exhaling. I don't know what to do. Phineas, he's asked me to marry him again. But I don't trust his motives. The doctor rested a hand on the back of a chair across from her, uncertain whether to sit. And you think you have to say yes? Because you have no other options? She closed her eyes, tears threatening to spill. I've got 2 small children. No steady income. If I refuse him, what? Then I can't live off your kindness forever. For a moment, Dr. Munro considered his next words carefully. Clara, I won't let you or the children go hungry or homeless. If Phineas isn't the right choice, don't bind yourself to him out of desperation. Her gaze rose to meet his, a wave of gratitude and something deeper stirring in her. Yet she couldn't dismiss the practicality of Phineas's offer. If the bank foreclosed, would she be cast aside again? She realized with a sinking heart that there might be no easy answer in this merciless frontier. While Clara wrestled with her decision, Redwood's population split into camps. Some sided with Phineas, claiming a mail-order bride had no right to be picky, especially one who showed up unannounced with children. Others, moved by Clara's circumstances, said Phineas was wrong to spurn a woman so vulnerable in a place as harsh as Redwood. And then there were those who watched Dr. Munro's kindness with keen interest, whispering that perhaps the doctor held affections for Clara, and that maybe his interest wasn't purely humanitarian. At the general store, a group of women discreetly gathered, including Mary Roberts, the blacksmith's wife, and Ruth Carver, an outspoken schoolteacher. Mary pointed to the children's clothing that Clara was washing in a basin out back. Poor things, they look half-starved, she murmured. That man Phineas should be ashamed of himself. Ruth, known for her progressive views, nodded. Clara was honest in her letters. He's just backpedaling. If that's the sort of man he is, maybe she's better off without him. Meanwhile, at the Broken Barrel Saloon, Phineas faced rougher criticism and the occasional jeer. Couldn't handle a couple of tykes, eh? Teased one drunk ranch hand. Phineas gritted his teeth, but he knew defending himself meant admitting he wasn't prepared financially or emotionally for instant fatherhood. The forced grin on his face revealed more fear than pride. Into this discord stepped Dr. Munro, who continued about his daily medical rounds with quiet dignity. If folks asked about Clara, he only replied that he was helping a mother and her children in need, nothing more. Yet his clear devotion to her well-being only fueled rumors that something more personal lay beneath his concern. Days passed, and Phineas's patience began wearing thin. He insisted Clara make a decision, warning that the bank could foreclose at any time, and if she wanted any claim to the ranch, they'd best marry soon. Torn between fear of a precarious life and lingering suspicion that Phineas would never truly accept her children, Clara delayed giving him an answer. One sultry evening after returning from a house call, Dr. Munro found Clara alone in the clinic. The twins were playing with wooden blocks in the next room, oblivious to the adult conversation. The doctor cleared his throat. His cheeks slightly flushed. Clara, I need to speak with you. She looked up, noting the tension in his face. Is something wrong? He paused, gathering his courage. I can't stand by and watch you marry a man who doesn't appreciate who you are. Nor can I see those children grow up under the shadow of his resentment. You deserve better. Her heart hammered. What are you saying? He inhaled deeply, as though steeling himself for battle. I'm saying that if you can't find a better way, I would be honored to marry you. Not out of pity, Clara, but because I admire you. And I care for you. I won't pretend it's only to keep you off the streets, though that's part of it. It's also because I believe we could build something good together. Clara felt the room spin. Shock and a sudden, inexplicable surge of relief washed over her. Could his words be real? Or was this another desperate arrangement in a desperate town? That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat by the window of the clinic's spare bedroom, gazing at the moonlit street, replaying Dr. Monroe's quiet, heartfelt proposal in her mind. Unlike Phineas's offer laced with guilt and practicality, the doctor's words resonated with genuine respect and compassion. But it all felt impossible. She had come to Redwood for Phineas, not for another man. Would the town see it as scandalous for her to wed Dr. Monroe so soon? She recalled how tenderly he cared for the twins, how gentle he was with her feelings, how he listened without judgment. She also recognized that his grief for his lost wife made him all the more protective of those in need. And as she thought back on Phineas, with his constant talk of finances and reluctance to embrace her children, her choice crystallized. When dawn broke, she found Dr. Monroe preparing coffee in the small kitchen. Sarah and Simon were tugging at his coat, hoping for a taste of the sugar lumps he occasionally kept for medical mixtures. Clara took a breath. "Doctor." "James," she corrected herself, stepping closer. "If your offer still stands, I accept. I want to be your wife." He exhaled, his face brightening with relief and something close to joy. "Then let's make it so," he said simply, taking her hand. Later that afternoon, they stood before Sheriff Cole, who performed the ceremony in the clinic's front room. A handful of townspeople gathered quietly, including a flustered Phineas, too late to claim what he'd so carelessly cast aside. And in that moment, with the twins clutching Clara's skirts, she discovered that the life she had feared might be over was in fact just beginning. Dear reader, the main arc of Clara's journey, arriving as a mail-order bride, being rejected, and then finding solace in a widowed doctor's proposal, culminated in a small, heartfelt wedding that left Redwood buzzing for weeks. However, life on the frontier did not grant happily ever afters without challenge. Though Clara and Dr. James Monroe sealed their vows that day, what followed was a new chapter laden with twists, triumphs, and testing moments that would forge their bond even stronger. Let us continue then to see how this family grew into the promise Clara once believed she had lost. In a single afternoon, Clara went from cast-off fiancée to the wife of the town's respected doctor. As she and James exchanged quiet vows, the children watched with wide-eyed curiosity. Sheriff Cole, ever pragmatic, delivered a no-frills ceremony, concluding with a simple directive, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. May the good Lord guide you." A smattering of townsfolk had slipped into the clinic to witness the event. Mary Roberts dabbed a tear from her eye, and Ruth Carver clutched her hands to her chest, clearly delighted by the romance of it all. Yet not everyone shared in the sentiment. Phineas stood at the back, his hat held awkwardly, a grim expression etched into his features. Though the wedding was small and unadorned, gossip turned it into the sensation of Redwood. Some insisted Dr. Monroe acted solely out of chivalry. Others swore they had seen love blossoming between the doctor and Clara from the moment she arrived. That evening, Clara cooked a modest supper in the clinic's kitchen. The twins, sensing the excitement, refused to settle. They giggled and played occasionally, toddling into the examination room until James gently herded them back. By the time the children were finally asleep, Clara and James found themselves alone for the first time since the impromptu nuptials. Seated at the small kitchen table, they sipped weak tea, each of them feeling the weight of this new reality. Marriage was an enormous step, especially for two people carrying scars of grief and hardship. But in the hush of that evening, with the moonlight spilling through the window, An unspoken peace descended. They had chosen each other not merely for survival, but for the shared desire to heal and create a home. No sooner had they settled into married life than Phineas appeared again. He arrived early one morning, his face pale, a letter in hand. Clara, adjusting her apron, greeted him at the clinic door. Her heart sank at the sight of the man who had so deeply wounded her trust. "Clara, Mrs. Monroe," he stammered, bowing slightly in an awkward gesture of respect. "Could I speak to you and the doc for a moment?" Reluctantly, Clara led him inside, where James was tending to a ledger of medical expenses. Phineas cleared his throat, his gaze flickering to a small crate of children's toys in the corner. "I came to say I'm leaving. Redwood." Phineas began, his voice unsteady. "The bank has foreclosed on my ranch. I lost the cattle. There's nothing left for me here." Clara felt a pang of sorrow for him, remembering that not so long ago she had planned to share that ranch and perhaps her life with him. James remained watchful, but silent, letting Phineas speak. "I'm truly sorry for everything." Phineas continued, clasping the letter in his hands. "You deserved better. Clara, better than I could give." He turned to James, nodding stiffly. "You're a good man, Doctor. I'm glad Clara has someone who'll care for her and the twins." A silence lingered heavy, with unspoken regrets and acceptance. Finally, Clara mustered a quiet kindness. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Phineas. I truly do." He exhaled, relief and sadness blending. Then he placed the letter on the table, an overdue final notice from the bank, and left without further ceremony. The dust kicked up by his departing horse lingered in the air like a fleeting echo of past mistakes. For Clara, that letter was a poignant reminder of how close she and her children had come to ruin. For James, it was a testament to how quickly circumstances could shift on the frontier. They stood side by side, absorbing the final page of a story that had almost ended differently. In its place, a new chapter was unfolding, one they would write together. In the weeks that followed, Clara embraced her role as both mother and doctor's wife. She managed the day-to-day chores, cooking, cleaning, and tidying the clinic's waiting area. James, touched by her efficiency, sometimes found her reorganizing his medical tools or studying his anatomy books with cautious fascination. "I'd like to learn more," she confided one afternoon, as the twins napped. "I studied a bit of midwifery back home. Maybe I could help you with patients, at least the simpler cases." James raised an eyebrow, considering. "Most folks around here have never seen a female nurse, let alone a midwife, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be a great help. We have a lot of ranchers' wives who might prefer a woman's presence during childbirth." Her smile spread slowly, like the warmth of dawn. "I can't just stay idle, and I do want to contribute." So began a humble apprenticeship of sorts. Clara learned how to bandage wounds, prepare medicinal herbs, and soothe a frightened child who came in with a scorpion sting. When emergencies arose, like a ranch hand kicked by a horse or a miner falling ill with fever, Clara stood beside James, handing him supplies and offering comforting words to patients. Her gentle presence and the twins' playful squeals helped transform the clinic into a more welcoming space. Outside the clinic, Redwood continued to evolve. Mary Roberts's blacksmithing business thrived, and Ruth Carver expanded her schoolhouse to accommodate new families. The settlement remained a rugged place susceptible to droughts and swindlers. But there was a growing sense of community, one that recognized the importance of caring for its neighbors. And for Clara, that sense of belonging was worth more than any ranch or dusty promise of gold. just as life began to settle, an influenza outbreak swept through Redwood. It started with a few fevers, then quickly overwhelmed households. Fear gripped the town. James rode out daily to tend to patients often returning exhausted. In his absence, Clara took charge of the clinic. She brewed herbal teas, cooled burning foreheads, and comforted the sick. Even the townsfolk who once whispered about her now called her the doc's angel. Then Sarah fell ill. Feverish and weak, she frightened Clara like nothing before. With James away, Clara leaned on everything she'd learned hydrating. Sarah cooling her skin and praying through the night. By dawn, the fever broke. Clara wept in relief. When James returned, he wrapped her in his arms, shaken by how close they'd come to loss. They both knew in the unforgiving West hardship was certain, but their love and unity would always carry them through. When the influenza outbreak finally eased, Redwood emerged changed. Grief had forged stronger bonds among neighbors. While Dr. James Monroe was praised for his tireless care, Clara's quiet heroism didn't go unnoticed. Her calm presence, nursing skills, and devotion to patients earned her respect even from former skeptics. One morning, Mary Roberts knocked on the clinic door with a warm smile and a basket of bread. "For all you've done for all of us," she said. Clara, touched, accepted the gift. This wasn't just gratitude, it was belonging. Later that week, Ruth Carver arrived with news of a fundraiser to repair the schoolhouse roof. "There'll be music and dancing," she said, "and we'd love for you and the doctor to come." Clara hesitated, but smiled. Once an outsider, she was now part of something greater. A town that had accepted her, not just as a wife or mother, but as a vital piece of its heart. The schoolhouse fundraiser dawned with clear skies and high spirits. Townsfolk gathered behind the school, stringing lanterns and setting up tables. Clara brought a few homemade pies, hoping they'd please the crowd. James arrived later in his best shirt, still weary from morning rounds, but smiling warmly when he saw Clara. A fiddler and banjo player struck up lively tunes, and Ruth Carver soon pulled James aside. "We need our doctor and his wife to open the dance," she teased. Blushing, Clara let James lead her onto the grass. The music swept them into a cheerful circle, laughter and clapping rising around them. Sarah and Simon clapped in delight from the sidelines, their joy infectious. As they danced beneath fluttering ribbons and golden sunlight, Clara met James's gaze. In it, she saw not just a partner, but the promise of peace after storms. The hardships, rejection, and uncertainty of her past seemed to fade beneath the joy of this moment. They were no longer survivors clinging to hope. They were a family embraced by a town that had once doubted her. And as the music played on, Clara realized she hadn't just found shelter. She had found a future. Life in Redwood grew richer with Clara and James's presence, but the frontier never stayed calm for long. Word spread of nearby raids and lawlessness. Names like Billy the Kid and the Pinkertons stirred up old fears. Even peaceful Redwood wasn't immune. One evening, a bloodied stranger arrived at the clinic, claiming to be a courier robbed on the open road. Clara kept the twins in the next room, while James tended the man's bullet wound. In a fevered daze, he muttered about outlaws and stolen documents. Alarmed, they contacted Sheriff Cole, who confirmed the man had been carrying important railroad deeds documents that in the wrong hands could stir dangerous conflict. Over the following weeks, violence edged closer. More patients came in with injuries tied to the spreading unrest. Clara, once preoccupied with survival, now worried every time James rode out on house calls. Yet through it all, their bond deepened. The danger only reinforced what they already knew. In this wild land of shifting fortunes, love and family were their truest anchors. Seasons passed, each bringing fresh trials, floods, drought, dust storms, and bitter winters. But Clara and James weathered them side by side. Their clinic became more than a place of healing. It was a cornerstone of community. People came not only for remedies, but for warmth, advice, and a slice of Clara's pie. The twins flourished. Sarah showed a gentle nature, often trailing her mother with makeshift bandages. Simon's curiosity led him to the blacksmith's forge, peppering the workers with questions. One spring morning, James invited Sheriff Cole Mary Roberts and Ruth Carver to the clinic. Clara served tea, her cheeks pink with excitement. Once everyone was seated, James smiled and took Clara's hand. "We wanted to share some news. You've all become like family to us," he said. "Clara and I are expecting a baby." Cheers and warm wishes filled the room. Clara, once unsure of her place in Redwood, now stood surrounded by love and support. After all the trials, she had found her home and her future. And so, dear listeners, that is the tale of Clara Hastings, the mail-order bride who arrived in a dusty town with two little ones by her side, only to be cast aside before finding a love far stronger than she ever dared dream. Where one door slammed shut, another opened in the form of a widowed doctor whose compassion for her plight evolved into devotion for her heart. Together they not only saved each other from loneliness, but also breathed new life into a frontier community that sorely needed their strength. If this story of survival, second chances, and steadfast love has touched you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every gesture of support helps us continue bringing you more heartfelt tales from history, folklore, and beyond. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We can't wait to share the next story with you.